Hi there, it's Sam again from the RPSM. Today we're going to talk about a different concept, and that is how chords that we build find themselves into the context of a scale. If you need a refresher on how to build chords, you can definitely watch my previous video that's on the RPSM channel. Also, if you need a refresher on how to build scales, you can find my colleague's video, Nathan Petitpas, who made a video about how to build major minor scales. That's also on the same channel. And it's a really, really good video, and you can find very, very useful information there. So let's hop on over to the piano and talk about the ways that major and minor chords find themselves in the context of a key, and what they do and how they function.
All right, so just to do a quick recap, let's talk about what a major scale is. Basically, a scale is the distance between two notes that have the same name and whatever it takes to get there. Now, some scales have 8 notes, some scales have 5 notes, pentatonic scale, some scales have all 12 notes, some scales have 8 notes. The scales, the standard scales that we use in Western classical music, for the most part, is what we call the major and minor scales, obviously. So a major scale is happens to be all the white notes. If you play from C to C, all the white notes. So that's, and like I said, you can go back to Nathan's video and watch him explain this extensively. I'm just kind of doing a quick recap. Great. Okay. So every major scale that you have, every scale generally that you have, has 7 distinct notes. Note number 1, note number 2, note number 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7. And by the time you get to the 8th notes, that's the same note as note number 1. Every one of these notes have a function. And as you saw, I also refer to them by their numbers. Those are called scale degrees. So scale degree is the number of the note in that scale, right? So this is number 1, and we oftentimes show them by Roman numerals. So number 1 would be I, and then 2 I's, number 2, 3 I's, IV, V, VI, VII, and then back to 1 again, right? Every one of these notes also have a name that we refer to, and it's just easier. It's just like a shorthand. So note number 1 in every scale, which is our home note, is the most important note that we have, is the note that we always refer to, is what we call the tonic. Okay, so note number 1 is tonic. We always start from the tonic. We always, when we get to the tonic, everything is gravitating towards the tonic. So even if I have a melody, I go. See, my melody just wanted to go to 1, both in the left hand and both in the right hand. It's just the way our ears work and the way the gravity of the tonic works. So note number 1 is the most important note. In this case, it's C, because we're in the key of C major. It's the home note, whatever you want to call it, right? The next note after this note that's very, very, very important is note number 5, the dominant note. Okay, so this is what we call the dominant note, note number 5. It's the most important note after the tonic. It's the note that always leads to it. It's the note that always has a tendency to go towards 1. And the note after that that's really important is what we call the subdominant, which from the way it's named, you can probably tell it's just 1 note below the dominant. So it's subdominant under the dominant. The rest of the notes also have some names. I'll just quickly go over them. You can also see them on the screen. So this is called the supertonic. This is called the mediant, because it's right in the middle. This is called the submediant. And note number 7 is called what we call a leading note or leading tone. Again, because of its property of being right next to the tonic, it always wants to lead to the tonic. So that's what we call the leading tone, as in it wants to lead to the tonic. Great. So we just learned that the 7 notes of the scale can be referred to by their scale degree, which is the number in like their order number, basically 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and their marked by Roman numerals, or by their names. The most important of which is number 1, which is the tonic. After that is note number 5, which is the dominant. And after that, note number 4, which is the subdominant. So far, so good. If you need to recap this, go back and listen to it again. It's a lot of information that you have to deal with. Great. So now we realize that on every one of these notes, we can build a chord or a triad. Now, we learned how to build chords and triads in the last class. Again, you can go back and rewatch that video. If you don't, if you want to just like really quick nutshell shorthand, you basically play every other note in a major scale. In this case, happens to be all the white notes. So this would be a chord, right? This would be what we call a C major chord. Now, you can build a triad on every one of the notes of the major scale, and it would have the same name as its note's name. So, for example, this is what we call a C major scale. We can also a C major chord. Sorry, we can also call it the tonic chord or the tonic triad. We can also call it chord number 1. So same way that we refer to its bottom note or the bass note, the root note basically, we can also refer to it to its chord. So this would be chord number 2, chord number 3, chord number 4, or the subdominant chord number 4. Sorry, my phone keeps running out of storage, so I have to restart the video. Anyways, we were talking about how basically the note names or the note labels can also be referred to the chords that we can build on those chords. So we had the tonic, number 1, D minor here. It's chord number 2, so it's supertonic, mediant. And subdominant, dominant, and then we have the submediant, which is the A minor chord. Leading tone, which is a diminished chord, which we haven't really talked about. And it's an extension of the 5 usually. And then we get back to 1 again. Okay, so let's try that again. Tonic, the important ones. We're going to just do the important ones. Subdominant and dominant. So these 3 chords are really important. And if you know these 3 chords in a lot of keys, you can pretty much find your way around harmonizing or putting chords underneath a lot of different songs that you know. And that's because a lot of songs sort of use these 3 chords. I'm not saying that you can harmonize them perfectly, but you can kind of, in a rather more or less basic, rudimentary way, kind of harmonize them. So it's really important that you know how to move between these 3 chords in every key. So, chord number 1, obviously, is kind of like the starting point, right? You can go anywhere at once. It can go to 6, it can go to 5, it can go to 4, it can go to 3, it can go to whatever. One of the most common places it goes to is usually either a subdominant chord or a dominant chord. Once we get to a subdominant chord, things can kind of go in a lot of different ways. It can go to another subdominant chord kind of type thing, like a D minor chord or an A minor chord. But what it usually is going to happen is that it's going to gravitate towards the dominant, because the subdominant is always trying to go to the dominant, going to higher. And when you go to the dominant chord, we always want to go back to the tonic, right? So in a nutshell, we always start our journey from tonic, note number 1. We make our way near the dominant or the subdominant area, and then we have variations of it. Let's say you have something like you have other chords that look like the subdominant chord, right? So like the A minor has a common note, or the D minor has 2 common notes. So they're kind of like similar chords, right? Okay. All right. So now, what we want to do is we want to be able to sort of connect these chords together. So whenever you connect a bunch of chords together, that's what we call a chord progression. So a progression of chords that come in a particular sequence. So for now, if we were to, let's say, connect our tonic chord to our dominant chord and then back to our tonic chord. Right? So this is what would be happening in our bass. And then the rest of the notes, the remainder of the notes, would also happen in the other voices. So we usually want to split them up in 4 voices, just because that's how choirs are split up, and that's how we like to think of our harmony as well, in 4-part harmony. So we have bass, then we have the other 3, tenor, soprano, and alto. Well, if you want to go in order, tenor, alto, soprano. All right, so let's just see. Now you're going to see it on the screen as well. So let's say we want to connect a C major chord. I'm also scrambling the notes in a way that they sound good. So instead of just having everything chopped up like this, I'm, for example, bringing these two notes up here. So I'm going to go from 1 tonic to the dominant, back to the tonic again. So that's what we call a 1-5-1, or tonic, dominant, tonic. I'll play it again. If you pay attention to my left hand is going C, G, C. That's a very simple progression, right? We've gone from the most important chord to the second most important chord, and then we went back. Very safe, very predictable. And there are obviously rules as to how you can connect these chords together and how each individual voice moves, but we're not going to get into that right now. So now if we want to go one more level further, and that's as far as I'm going to go today, is what if we added the subdominant chord in there too? So before going to 5, we just made a little quick bit stop at the subdominant to make it sound a little bit more lush, a little bit more complicated, a little bit more interesting. So that would be a 3 chord progression, or a 3-triad chord progression, where we go from 1, and then we go to 4, F major, and then we go to 5, and then we go back to 1 again. So if you pay attention to my left hand is going tonic, subdominant, dominant, and back to the tonic. Listen again. Very nice. Now, just before I let you go, all we've talked about today has been the major scale, but we also have minor scales, which are really super nice. So just a quick thing. I mean, nothing changes about the functionality of the notes. Nothing changes about the way they're labeled. It's just the literal notes that are different. So if you want to build a C minor chord, your E flat, your A flat, and your B become flat. Although B becomes natural because when we play it, we play the harmonic minor scale, where the 7th note is raised. So we're actually going to imagine that our B is actually natural, because that we need our leading note. So then your 1 chord becomes a minor chord. Your 2 chord, your supertonic, becomes a diminished chord, which we haven't really talked about yet. Your 3rd chord, your immediate chord, is a major chord, in this case an E flat major chord. Your 4 chord, your subdominant chord, important one, is a minor chord, F minor chord. And then we have the nice dominant chord. But if you pay attention, you'll see that the dominant between C major and C minor is still a G major chord. It's still the same chord, because we're making this B natural in the harmonic minor scale, right? So a dominant chord between 2 scales that have the same name of major and minor is always the same. So in this case, G major, C minor, or C major, it doesn't matter, right? And then we go back to this chord, which is diminished 6. So this is what we call a submediate, and then the leading tone chord, and then back to 1 again. So as also you see it on the string. So if we want to have the same chord progressions that we just did now in minor, so we go 1, 5, 1. So 1, 5, 1, tonic, dominant, tonic. Now what if we want to have the 1, 4, 5, 1, so the slightly lusher one? I'll play both of them again. So this is 1, 5, 1. 1, 4, 5, 1. Pay attention to my left hand, because that's the important thing, right? The left hand movement, because that's what is really the root of the chords, the base of the chords, and that's indicating how our chords are moving. Whatever is happening on top is a rearrangement of these chords to make it sound smooth and nice. But you really want to pay attention to the left hands. 1, 5, 1. Now you can have a different voicing. You can have this voicing, and then or you can go right. So or you can have. I'm re-scrambling the notes, but as you can see, the left hand is always the same. Okay, so let's hop back on to the computer, to the desk, and talk about sort of an overview of what we did today.
So as you saw, we learned about how scales can sort of be home to a variety of different chords, and how those chords have different functions, and how they move together, and how they move to each other, and what chord progressions are. So what to take away from this is that the most important note and the most important chord in every scale is chord number 1, which is called the tonic. After that, the chord number 5 is the most important, which is called the dominant, and the subdominant. And these chords can kind of more or less freely move to each other, As we talked about it, the 1-4-5 kind of progression is one of the most commonly used progressions in a lot of the different genres of music that we know and talked about. So a really good way of doing sort of exercising this would be to, if you're a piano player or if you're a guitar player, try to find at least the root notes, the left hand or the bottom, the root note, the bass note of 1-4-5-1 in maybe 4, 5, 6 different keys with 1 or 2 sharps or 1 or 2 flats, both major and minor, and see if you can sort of make that happen. And I will assure you that that's going to help you a lot. Once again, if you want to learn more about how to actually build the chords or how to build scales, you can refer to the other 2 videos in the RPSM theory channel made by myself and Nathan. And I'll see you next time.